Something I get asked so often when it comes to the pages in a children's book is what the difference is between the terms page numbers, number of pages, and page count, and whether or not a children's book needs to have page numbers printed on the pages or if they can just be omitted. Pages really can get a bit confusing at times, so in this video we will look at what each of these terms is referring to and when and how they are being used correctly. Hi there, I'm Eevi, an award-winning children's author and ghostwriter over on eevijones.com and the creator of Children's Book University. I create videos specifically for children's authors, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss my weekly videos. So in this video, we are going to look at what each of these terms refers to, the 3 things that will determine whether or not a children's book needs page numbers, 6 main guidelines we will want to follow if we are including page numbers, and in the end, we will look at the minimum number of pages required to be able to print our children's book, because that differs between the different formats and between the different platforms. So it's all about the pages. So let's jump right in. When it comes to children's book or books in general, it's really important to understand that the term page number is not the same as the term number of pages or page count. The page numbers are the numbers printed inside our book on each page. Its sole purpose is to help readers find a certain part or section in a book. And so a page number is usually only printed on pages that hold the actual story part of our book. The number of pages, on the other hand, includes all the countable pages in our book, not just those that are part of our story. So any page that is part of the front and back matter of our book are included, such as the copyright page, our acknowledgement page, or our About the Author page. And the term page count means exactly the same. The page count is the number of pages. So let's look at page numbers first. Again, those are the actual numbers printed on the pages that hold the actual story of our book. And so here the main question I receive is whether or not a children's book needs to have page numbers or if they can simply be omitted. While books of most other genres usually include page numbers, children's books often do not. And so whether or not our own children's book should show page numbers largely depends on 3 things. Number 1, the age group our children's book is written for. In my video on finding the best book length for a children's book, I shared that the length or word count of our story always depends on the age group our book is meant for. If you would like to watch that video as well, I went ahead and added the link to it in the description below. And so the younger our target audience, the smaller the word count, the higher the number of illustrations, and the shorter the book. And the older our target audience, the higher the word count, the lower the number of illustrations, and the longer the book. And so oftentimes, because books for older kids are longer, including page numbers for longer books often makes a lot more sense. That's why picture books that are meant for younger kids usually don't have page numbers printed on their pages, because they are usually really short. A great example here are Llama Llama books with this double spread example right here. So these types of books often don't have page numbers printed on them. The types of books associated with older kids, on the other hand, are usually chapter books or graphic novels, for example. And because they are longer, it makes a lot more sense to include page numbers here. Here, great examples are any books of the Magic Treehouse series, where all its chapter books show page numbers. And a great example for graphic novels would be any of Dave Pilkey's books like Cat Kid right here. Number 2, the second thing that determines whether or not a children's book should have page numbers is whether or not this book has a table of content. Because as soon as a book contains a table of content, it needs to have the page numbers printed on the individual pages. Otherwise, the table of content would pretty much be useless, right? Because the main purpose is to help the reader find a certain place in a book. And we can only designate those different places in our book with the use of page numbers. A great example here are books that contain a collection of stories for little ones. If a book holds multiple stories, it usually has a table of content, and therefore this book usually shows page numbers in order to make the table of content useful. A really great and specific example here are the Berenstain Bears books. While their regular individual books usually don't show any page numbers, their storybook treasure collections that hold multiple stories do show page numbers because they also have a table of content to show the reader what stories are included in the story collection and on what page each of these stories begins. So whether or not we should include printed page numbers depends on 1, the age group the book is written for, and 2, it depends on whether or not our book contains a table of content. But in the end, whether or not you include page numbers in your own children's book is entirely up to you. And that's why number 3, the third thing that determines whether or not a children's book shows page numbers, are the author's own preferences. The main thing that our decision should be based on is whether or not adding page numbers would add value and would be useful to the reader. Now, if we do decide to add page numbers to our pages, here are 6 main guidelines we will want to pay attention to. Now, please remember that these are simply guidelines, so there will always be books that may have a slightly different setup. Guideline number 1 is to know and remember that the first physical page in our book isn't necessarily the page that has number 1 printed on it. So the first physical page in our book isn't necessarily considered page 1. So pages like the copyright page or the dedication page usually are not page number 1. Instead, page number 1 is often used for our title page or the very first page that shows the very beginning of our actual story. Guideline number 2 is that the page that has the number 1 printed on it is always on the right. So if you only remember one thing from this entire video, let it be this right here, that the page that has the number 1 printed on it is always on the right. Which leads me to guideline number 3. Because 1 is an odd number, any odd page number should be on the right page and any even page number should be on the left page. So this is a great way to check and make sure we have applied correct pagination. Guideline number 4 is something I've already hinted towards earlier, and that is that the title page is usually considered page number 1. Not always, but usually. And therefore, our title page is always on the right. And so I have 2 side notes here. Side note number 1 here is to remember that the title page is not the same as the cover page, right? The cover page is always on the outside of our book, on the cover, while the title page is on the inside of our book. And side note number 2 is that even though the title page is often considered page number 1, oftentimes it doesn't have the page number printed on it. So they are often omitted here. But if we were to turn the page, the next page, which would be on the left, would show or be counted as page number 2, and the next page to the right of it would show or be counted as page number 3, and so on. Guideline number 5 when it comes to page numbers is that they are usually placed along the bottom in the center or along the bottom on the outside edge of the page. Something that we can also see in much older chapter books is that those have their page numbers printed on the top, but that's a lot less common and again in much older books. And guideline number 6 is that chapter books often don't have page numbers printed on pages that have a full bleed illustration that extends to the edges of the page. Those pages are still counted, so we are not skipping them, but the page numbers in those instances are simply omitted and then picked up again on the next page that follows. This right here shows us what all these guidelines would look like in action. But remember, this layout right here is just an example. The order of those front matter pages is entirely up to our own preferences as authors. So let's say we decide to make our title page number 1, then the first page onto which we would actually print our page number would be page 5, the very first page of our actual story. And while there are other pages in between the title page and the first page of our actual story, they don't have a page number printed on them, even though they are being counted. So the first printed page number would be on page 5 because our title page is page 1. The copyright page in this example would be page 2. The table of contents page would be page 3. And the dedication page would be page 4. And here's another quick example where our story begins with a double spread. So the first printed page number would be on page 4 because again, our title page is page 1. The copyright page in this example would be page 2. The table of contents page would be page 3. And the first page of our actual story would be page 4. But again, the order of these front matter pages is entirely up to us authors. So oftentimes we would also see the copyright page printed before the title page. If that's the case, we wouldn't count it as a page number because again, our first counted page number would be the title page. If you'd like to see what else would be considered front matter and also what goes into a book's back matter, be sure to watch my other video on that as well. I'll go ahead and add the link to that separate video in the description below. So that takes care of everything we need to know about page numbers. But what about our number of pages? Remember that our number of pages includes all the pages of our book, not just those that have a page number printed on them. So any pages that are part of the front and back matter of our book are included, even those that are placed before our title page. So if we were to sit down and physically count every single page in our book, then that would be our number of pages, which is also referred to as our page count. Now, knowing the actual number of pages is important for two main reasons. One, our number of pages will determine the width of our spine for our book cover. So the width of the spine of a book will differ depending on the number of pages because the more pages, the wider the spine. And two, we will want to know our number of pages to make sure we meet the minimum required page count in order to be able to print our children's book. So for Kdp, the minimum page count or number of pages for paperbacks is currently 24 pages, and over on Ingram Spark it is currently 18 pages. A quick side note here is that at the making of this video, Kdp's minimum page count or number of pages for hardcovers is currently still 76 pages, which I hope will be lowered once Kdp is out of its beta phase for hardcovers. Fingers crossed. My quick and really useful ninja tip when it comes to figuring out the number of pages for longer children's books, like chapter books, without having to sit down and physically count the pages would be to simply look at your book's PDF file that you have created to be submitted in Kdp. After opening that PDF file, however many number of pages it shows in your PDF's page count, that's your total number of pages of your book. Now, everything I've shared with you in this video is based mainly on two things. One, my own experience of having written and ghostwritten more than 50 children's books, whether that's for myself or for my ghostwriting clients. And two, current industry standards as well as my own research. And so I'd like to encourage you to see that there's never just one way of doing things. Instead, there are more common and less common ways. Pages really can get a bit confusing at times, so hopefully this video helped you see when and how to use these individual page-related terms correctly. And again, if you need help figuring out how long your children's book should be sure to watch my separate video on that as well, which I'll link to in the description below. I hope you found this video really helpful. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't yet. It really encourages me to keep making free videos for you just like this one. Here's to your very own page numbers and page count. Bye! The number of pages will determine the width of our spine. Width. The width of our spine. You know how thick it is. Thickness. The thickness of the spine. Width.